Okay, let's move on. I want to introduce the next group of people. Maybe take yourselves, put your camera on while I'm doing the introductions. I'm going to introduce you all at once and tell everyone a bit about you all. First, Michelle MacLean is the Union Co-Chair of the Ministry of Corrections Occupational Stress and Injury Committee. She started working in corrections in 1986 in Nova Scotia and then worked 10 years there and moved to Ontario and still works at the Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center where she is today. And health and safety has always been her love and dedication. She's been on the Health and Safety Committee at her workplace since 2005. She became the co-chair in 2012. And in 2018, she took it provincial and was elected as the Provincial Joint Health and Safety Committee chair for corrections. So she's currently the vice chair. And since 2019, she's been chair of this, what we call the OSI committee, that has been doing a lot of this work. And I'll be introducing her counterpart, Lisa O'Brien, in a second. So next, we have Denise Sidsworth. We heard from Denise a bit today. Denise Sidsworth started her career with the Ministry of Solicitor General in 1999 as a correctional officer first at Maplehurst. And then in 2003, she went to Community Corrections, where she works as a probation and parole officer at the Brampton unit, supervising adult offenders. So Denise has had various elected union positions and currently is the Community Services Probation Representative on the Provincial Joint Health and Safety Committee, as well as the OSI Committee. And Adam Cygler, give a wave, Adam. So prior to joining the Ministry of Solicitor General, Adam worked in community corrections with the federal correctional system. He also spent several years completing mental health assessments in the Central Booking Facility down in Austin, Texas. Adam joined the Ministry of Solicitor General as a social worker at Central North Correctional Center first, which is a maximum security prison in Penetang, in 2008. But currently, though, he's a case coordinator, social work supervisor at the Ontario Correctional Institute, which is a medium security treatment facility. Now, Adam has held various elected union positions and is currently a member of the Provincial Employee Relations Committee. And he's been a member of the Provincial Occupational Health and Stress OSI Committee since 2016. And Frank, give a wave. Frank Inglis has been a health and safety officer with the Health and Safety Unit at OPSEU for the past 4 years and has supported this OSI committee for the past year. Now, Frank has over 25 years of union health and safety activism experience in a variety of roles, not just health and safety. Prior to health and safety, he spent 10 years in OPSEU's arbitrations unit, doing grievances and working with institution and community corrections responsibilities there. And he was a table officer for 10 years and both president and provincial joint committee chair at OPSEU's only province-wide local. So Frank's got a lot of experience. And then we're so pleased to have Lisa here today. Lisa O'Brien is Michelle's counterpart, chair of the employer, chair of the co-chair of the OSI committee. But her career, give a wave, Lisa. Her career with the ministry began 30 years ago as a frontline correctional officer at Elgin Middlesex, which is a maximum security female and adult institution in London. So after 19 years there, she progressed into management and deputy superintendent ranks before transferring to Stratford and later Brantford jails as the superintendent between 2012 and 16. But since 16, she has held various regional and corporate positions, including deputy and regional director, as well as acting executive director out of the office of the assistant deputy minister. So since 2016, Lisa has been a key member of the Provincial Joint Health and Safety Committee, later becoming the employer co-chair. And then in 2019, she joined as the employer co-chair of the OSI committee. So you can see that there's top leadership commitment for this committee and the work and what you're going to hear today. Stephen Mitchell, if you're here, Stephen, give a wave. Stephen Mitchell began his career working as a probation and parole officer in Thunder Bay 22 years ago. He moved into a management role in corrections, but then transferred to Youth Justice Services as a manager in Kenora. While in the Youth Justice Division, he had the opportunity to work in a couple of different roles, like inspector and regional manager. but he returned to corrections in 2019 as the regional director in the Northern region and has taken on responsibility as co-chair for the Provincial Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee for Community Services. And he has also been actively involved with this OSI committee for the past year. So this is going to be an inspiring story about working on mental health in the psychosocial environment in a very large province spanning and challenging workplace. Ontario's correctional system is made up of facilities and probation and parole services. So it's a varied workplace. And with full disclosure, I was so honored to participate with this group for at least 10 years prior to my retirement. But I'm retired and they're doing the work now. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them for the next 30 minutes.
So my hope is that I am still competent in sharing.
That's my hope too, Adam.
So thank you for the introduction, Terry. I think, hearing the two previous presentations, I think this fits in very well with sort of the topic today, going from Chile where it's sort of mandatory to do what it is that we managed to do in a partnership here. And then also looking at the last presentation where I would say our big push has been exactly around that. We need to change the workplaces and not just sort of put shields on workers so that they come in a bubble, resilient bubble to be able to work through sort of challenging and difficult conditions. So I'm going to just we're going to run through our presentation, and then absolutely, if there's any questions at the end, we'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you so much, Terry, for the intros and the first two presentations. Honestly, you guys, very interesting. And to Adam's point, I think this will blend in, quite nicely. So today we're here. Thank you very much for the invite to provide a brief overview of the Ministry of the Solicitor General's Correctional Services Division for the employer and the OPSEU Corrections Division for the union. And to discuss the implementation of the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire in correctional workplaces in Ontario, and also to describe the joint project that is currently underway to mitigate psychosocial hazards in the correctional workplaces.
I'm going to just provide a bit of a overview of the Ministry of the Solicitor General. The Ministry of the Solicitor General is formerly known as the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services. It's really the ministry in the government of Ontario that's responsible for public security, policing, emergency management, and the business we're involved in, which is provincial correctional centers and detention centers, as well as community corrections. There's some examples with respect to the Ontario Provincial Police, Emergency Management Ontario, and the Office of the Fire Marshal. Those are divisions or aspects within the Ministry of the Solicitor General as well. Our Solicitor General is Sylvia Jones, who's an elected MPP, and we have two deputy ministers, Deputy Mario Di Tommaso, who is responsible for the policing side of our ministry, and which is called Community Safety, and our Deputy Karen Ellis, who's responsible for the Correctional Services side of our ministry. Within the Correctional Services slide, we have a few divisions. Of note, though, our Institutional Services division, which is comprises 25 adult institutions, jails, and correctional centers across the province of Ontario. And then we have the Community Services, which comprises 121 probation and parole offices across the province of Ontario. We also have a third division that has called the Operational Support Division. And operational support comprises many different departments and branches which support the work of institutional services and community services, which includes things like recruitment, training, employee wellness, etc.
Within all of our facilities, there's approximately 9,000 members. They're located in adult correctional institutions, adult probation and parole offices, correctional services, training and recruitment centers, youth probation offices, and youth facilities. Both adult and youth are in separate ministries and have separate provincial committees, but today we're going to focus on the adult institutions and offices within Solgen. Provincial Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee was developed to address health and safety issues. We have 3 OPSEU institutional service representatives, which are all elective, 1 OPSEU probation and parole representative, which is elected as well, and 1 OPSEU Ministry of Employee Relations Committee, or MERC, co-chair, which is elected, who sits on our committee, and 1 OPSEU Health and Safety Officer to help keep us on track. On the employer side, they have 5 representatives at the senior management level. An example of that would be a director or a deputy director, and 1 from within community services.
Now, so setting the stage, a little bit of history. In October of 2012, the Ombudsman released the In the Line of Duty report. This was an investigation into how then the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, now the Ministry of Solicitor General, and the OPP had addressed operational stress injuries. Recommendations included the development and implementation of a province-wide confidential survey to identify how many Ontario police officers are impacted by operational stress injuries, and a requirement for all police services to provide information on education, training, supports, and services to address operational stress injuries. Following that, in November of 2012, the Cotton Report recommendations included an internal study to be completed on causes and levels of stress, the development of proactive primary interventions, and training for managers in leadership and management competencies. Fast forward to January of 2013 then, where the Occupational Stress Injury, or OSI, mandate is created through language in the collective agreement between the OPSEU Corrections Division and the Crown, an employer. Following the ratification of the collective agreement, the parties agreed to form a subcommittee of the Provincial Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee. The OSI subcommittee then began meeting in September of 2013. And the scope includes reviewing trends of violence in the workplace, recommending a strategic plan to meet the physical and psychological demands, recommending training to recognize signs of occupational stress, and identification of support programs to treat occupational stress injuries. The current membership of the OSI subcommittee includes 3 employer and 3 OPSEU representatives, both from institutional and community services, and as well the employee wellness unit out of our operational support division is utilized as a resource.
So at this point in time, the subcommittee was newly formed to address sort of this really large topic of occupational stress and injuries. And really the first steps for the committee was to learn and get a feel for what work had already been done and what sort of research and best practices were telling us to do. So at that time, we reviewed a bunch of the things that studies that were out there and literature. The Cotton Report was specific to corrections. The Line of Duty Ombudsman Report was sort of about the ministry as a whole, but with a focus on policing and the OPP. Obviously, the Psychological Health and Safety Standards, academic articles, and various presentations from OCAL, was a big partner with us in getting started and getting us to understand, the COPSOC and how we want to apply that, as well as other organizations and first responder organizations across the province and across the country. After doing all of that learning piece, the subcommittee presented joint recommendations back up to the Deputy Minister for review. And the key one was number 2 there, to complete a survey to establish a baseline pulse of the organization. And that was really sort of to get the lay of the land, to understand what occupational stress factors were at play, what were the psychosocial factors that needed intervention. So now the committee was at the point where we were starting to get organized in terms of what we were going to assess and what we were going to do next. We started thinking, how would we implement these strategies? How would this be tracked? And really, how are we going to figure out what those metrics were going to be? And in 2016, things are slow moving with a large organization and with labor relations. So it took until 2016 to really start that conversation and land on what are we going to measure and how are we going to do it and how are we going to administer whatever survey we were going to do. So we really looked at 2 surveys, kind of came to the top of the pile for us. One was from the Canadian Institute for Public Safety and Research and Treatment. So they're an organization out of several universities who've done a lot of work with public safety personnel in Canada. And back in 2016, at that time, they'd done several versions of this survey with correctional workplaces, federal correctional workplaces across the country, as well as some of the other provincial workplaces. That survey had a focus on traumatic incidents and really looking at sort of the prevalence of mental health diagnoses or mental health injuries within the workplace. And there was a smaller section on the psychosocial factors in the workplace. And, you know, many of us here are familiar with the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire, and really that focus is on the psychosocial factors and those hazards in the workplace. There's also questions around physical hazards in the workplace, which for us was really important. And then there was also some coverage of traumatic incidents. And so rather than focusing on one or the other, what we decided and agreed to was that we would administer both surveys as a you know, part 1 and part 2 to all of the employees within the organization. Really, we wanted this to be a joint initiative to really encourage participation, to encourage the confidentiality or, you know, the anonymity of the responses that would come back. So the SIPCERT responses went directly to that organization, and we only got back sort of the processed information, and same thing with the COPSOC. We didn't get any individual responses, though those went directly to OCAL, who was a great help in both administering the survey and in helping us understand the results. So we, you know, did a lot of joint promotion. There was a joint memo that went out. The link was sent out both through the employer emails list sort of in the workplaces, but also through the union lists outside of the workplaces, so that people who were on various types of leaves, including injured workers or sick workers, were able to participate in this survey. So we launched the survey sort of mid-December 2017, and it remained open for roughly 6 months until the end of June in 2018. And then the results from the COPSOC were presented by OCAL back to the committee in September 2018. So at that point, we were starting to understand what those results were. The next couple slides are just sort of high-level results of the survey that was administered. Overall in the organization, we had about a 34.5% response rate for both frontline staff across all of the institutions and community services locations, including unionized employees as well as management or excluded employees. Want to give a particular shout out to the work that was done within our community services section. So that's our probation and parole offices throughout the province. So they really pushed it hard amongst their membership in that area. There's about 1,000 of those employees across the province, and their response rate was 70% in that range. So really like a good work that they did to get people to respond to this survey. What we found was that, you know, roughly 2/3 of the respondents to the survey found that the workplace psychological health and safety climate was not so good, poor, or toxic. So on that sort of negative side. We also found that, you know, a significant amount of people believe that the organizational culture tolerated behaviors that were harmful to mental health. Compassion fatigue scores were fairly high, you know, 56% on those higher ranges there. And when we looked at burnout, 53% were rating themselves in the much worse than the Canadian average area. So these were all things that were not necessarily surprising to us based on anecdotal stories and evidence and just our personal experiences. But finally, we were starting to see some of the results and actually see sort of some numbers to back what our experiences had been. And then regarding the COPSOC results, provincially, this is what came out as sort of those key psychosocial demands, and you can see the demands for hiding emotions and emotional demands were quite high, as well as horizontal trust. There were some differences between individual work sites, as well as between the institutional or facilities, as well as community corrections. And one of the things that stood out in community corrections was the quantitative demands was actually a significant factor there as well. So taking a look at all of these all of these results, we really started to decide on what our next steps would be and how we would not just tackle those individual pieces, but start looking at how we would put together a plan to address those primary psychosocial factors in the workplace. And when we looked at the psychosocial factors that were most associated with the symptoms, as well as employee engagement and job satisfaction. This was really our hook to get buy-in from senior leadership and administration within the organization, that look, the things that you guys that are very important to the organization, such as job satisfaction and employee engagement, are also the same factors that are correlated with the symptom scores in our results, as well as the psychological health and safety rating of the environment. So if we tackled things like rewards recognition, trust of management, justice and respect, we would see improvements in all of those areas, both in sort of how individual employees were feeling, but as well as their engagement in the workplace.
So where we're at now is at the assess. Moving through, we're at the assess phase. So what are we assessing? And now we had some data to assist us with that. So what happened next? The first step was to really understand the results and begin to formulate a plan on how to make some change. And making that change, you knew it was not going to be easy, because we're looking at a societal shift towards employee wellness and mental health awareness. The employer did begin to implement many strategies, most of them targeted at the individual level for both manager and worker. And limited work was being completed to implement organizational changes based on the OSI survey results. And that was our focus, was more on the organizational change that needed to happen. So if you look at the chart that we've made, you can see the employer's initial response was more on the individual. So looking at those primary, secondary, tertiary interventions, and then we've listed some examples, whereas the union's interest was more in that societal, organizational, and group shift, making some changes there at the primary level. And, you know, there was a lot of work that had to be done along the way to get everybody sort of on the same page. So if you can see from this, where was the organization and where we were? So the OSI would be the OSI subcommittee that we're part of, which is a joint committee. However, I would say we were at the change phase in 2019, whereas the organization, being the bigger employer, was at the learn phase. So definitely difference in where we were at. So we took it back to basics, needed to return to health and safety 101. When controlling traditional workplace hazards, there's three options. You can start at, number one, control the hazard at the source, eliminate the hazard completely or place controls where the hazard enters the work site. 2, control the hazard along the path, limit workers' exposure as the hazard moves through the work site. And 3, control the hazard at the worker, PPE issued to worker, for example. So what about the psychosocial hazards? At the source, primary intervention, which has always been our focus at the OSI subcommittee, treating the root cause and building resilience. Examples include modifying job design, organizational adaptations, increasing flexibility management, policy and program changes, or staffing model changes. Along the path, secondary intervention, early detection programs, or building worker wellness strategies. Examples include educating workers about symptoms and coping skills, wellness programs, screening tools for new hires. And then at the worker, tertiary intervention, treating the consequences of OSI. Example, helping those that are already injured. Examples include treatment programs, compensation recognition, return to work support, EFAP supports, therapy program options, and peer support programs. So the union's push was to talk about primary interventions. And this took several attempts to get traction to talk about primary interventions. And there was, quite a few things along the way that impeded some of it. And one of them was changes in leadership positions for the employer, and the union delayed the process. And everybody needed to see that we were in this together. So this is where the union wanted to implement the Quebec-based model off the IRSST.
The IRSST provided us with a unique example of how to really operationalize what we wanted to do within Ontario based on what happened within Quebec. So in Quebec corrections, the union there was organized simply around the correctional officer group. So le syndicat des agents de la paix en service correctionnel, and they worked in partnership with their ministry there and this research group, the IRSST, to really examine some of the concerns that they had. Their concerns were slightly different. They were around correctional officer absenteeism and employment injuries, but they linked these organizational factors. And really the problem that they had within their workplaces was violence among and between employees. And so the IRSST had this hypothesis that if they targeted these organizational work demands for change, that would help reduce violence amongst employees within the organization. So the IRSST project really sort of outlined what they did, starting with setting up a steering committee sort of at the provincial level, which was really similar to how we're organized here in Ontario, doing that pre-intervention baseline survey, which we had already completed. And then for the IRSST project, the first hypothesis was if we do nothing, nothing is going to change. So they did a second survey in 2004 and confirmed that, yes, when you do nothing, those organizational factors don't necessarily shift on their own. And then in 2006, they really targeted particular interventions around those organizational factors with a coordinated approach at certain sites. And then they did several follow-up surveys to see how those results happen. And what they found was that where they had those targeted interventions around those organizational factors, their workplaces improved. And those psychosocial factors in the workplaces improved, their violence amongst employees dropped. And so this is sort of a slide that shows their setup. And what they did was they picked 3 correctional institutions to be sort of experimental groups or experimental sites. And then they had 3 similarly matched for size and sort of climate control correctional centers where they did nothing. And in the survey, the follow-up surveys that they did after the interventions, that's where they found those differences between the experimental sites and the control groups. Each experimental site really had a lead team that consisted of the Joint Health and Safety Committee, which had correctional officers, senior managers, as well as researchers there to support the research that was being done. And they selected the interventions that were going to be carried out. And the foundation of the process, which kind of brings us back to our first presentation for today, was really worker participation in the process. It couldn't be a top-down approach with employer or management representatives picking what needed to change. It really needed to be a joint process and driven from the ground up or grassroots to have that employee participation in the process and in the interventions. So the employees were the ones who identified which organizational work demands were at the root cause of the problems and needed that intervention. So what we wanted to do here was really take that Quebec model, take the learning that they had in facilitating this project and adapt it to our organization here in Ontario. There was some key learning points from the Quebec project was that there needed to be this real shift in how detention center environments work. They're typically autocratic, paramilitary, and bureaucratic. So a very top-down approach. And really what we wanted to facilitate was that worker participation piece in this project. Failures of previous projects really created a lot of skepticism and resistance among employees. And so what was key was that joint objective and really that joint partnership. And it was really a challenge to share those new values with everyone because of that skepticism and resistance. And the success of the project really hinged on what those individual administrators or prison wardens at the facilities, how much they bought into and sort of reinforce that participatory piece of the project. And as with many things, you know, financial requirements was an obstacle, right? Change takes money, and if there's no money to fund some of those different initiatives, then that's a barrier in the process.
Thanks, Adam. Now we'd like to take you, from the idea portion to the actual launch of the project. So in February and March of 2020, the union conducted a formal pitch to implement the Quebec model, as Adam has just described, and presented that to the ministry's senior management cadre, including our assistant deputy ministers. The employer representatives at that time were receptive to the pitch. Then in March of 2020, as we all know, COVID happened. So fast forward to the fall of 2020, we moved ahead and the employer formally indicated that they supported the union's plan. In November of 2020, the union provided a presentation to all community and institutional regional directors in consultation with the OSI subcommittee. And then in the winter and spring 2020 and 21, the union and the employers narrowed down and selected 5 experimental sites, 3 in the institutions and 2 community locations. In the summer of 2021, the project scope and timeline were developed jointly between the union and the employer. And then in October of 2021, the project was launched with those 5 local work sites. So as far as the project model goes, the very first step was for the local work sites to assess the project. The OSI subcommittee drafted a 1-pager that was then distributed to all staff at the local sites for review. And the OSI subcommittee continued to assist at the local work sites in understanding the Part 1 OSI survey results. The local work sites then developed methods for generating their ideas, and multiple virtual sessions were held to maximize participation from the frontline staff. Brainstorming sessions were then held, retaining all working copies such as flip charts, notes, etc., to refer to for future sessions that they would hold. And there was a 2-week period determined for ideas to be submitted confidentially. And one of the suggestions was whether that be via email to a trusted person, Dropbox, or several other ideas that we discussed. The local work sites then drafted an ideas document that highlighted the top 10 ideas that were sourced from the frontline staff. And then they developed a tracking system for implementation. So where we are at now, the local work sites are getting ready to, implement their change ideas. The local work sites are currently meeting monthly to develop and implement plans. And this is so that the local administrators can then implement any action plans with support from their labor relations committees at the local level, as well as their joint health and safety committees. At that time, the final roll-up report will then be sent to the OSI subcommittee.
The actual project plan, in November of 2021, the local work sites finalized their project teams, which consisted of both management and employees. In December of 2021, with the assistance of OCAL, local work sites formalized themselves with the COPSOC results for their work locations. In January 2022, detailed joint presentations to all local work sites on the next steps of the project took place. In January and February of 2022, the local work sites held their brainstorming sessions with their staff and are in the process of providing reports of the results to the OSI subcommittee. February, September of 2022, the local work sites are still meeting monthly to implement plans developed from their brainstorming session, what works for them. September 2022, local worksite teams will be sending the roll-up report to the OSI committee, including recommendations for consideration in larger organizational rollout. Not all items could be fixed or improved upon at the local work sites. Some could have overarching implications. So in the early of 2023, that's our tentative schedule to launch a follow-up survey to see if any changes in the psychosocial hazards, if there's been an improvement. And in late 2023, we will have discussions about expanding the project to other work sites across our ministry.
So like any project, doesn't go without challenges. And just we've highlighted some of those challenges. Intervening in psychosocial factors, obviously not a visible injury or factor. Changing organizational and workplace culture, which is just a huge shift to make, and it doesn't happen overnight. We work in a unionized environment, so we have things that naturally impact our project, such as a bargaining cycle. There's internal dynamics, workplace labor relations. Also, we've had changes in our committee on both the union and the employer side, so that certainly has impacted the project. And then, of course, what's impacted the world, COVID, and that definitely impacted the project, and especially in the institutions being congregate care settings.
So in terms of our process, or sort of our journey along this piece, we can see where we are now, where we're in that change phase, both at the subcommittee level, but also at the organizational level. sort of across with these experimental sites going at those 5 locations and that participatory process. And our next step is in sort of 2023 is really going to be doing some evaluation and deciding on next steps on how to expand the project. So that's the end of our formal presentation. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you so
how
much.
we've operationalized all of this.
That was amazing. I'm sure there are lots of questions. All I can say is when I hear an organization of say 100 or 200 people saying that this is hard to do, we say, hey, this is a journey. It's not like a race. And so you can do it. So good for you guys. Opening it up for questions, comments, thoughts, reflections. Frank? Yep, go ahead, Frank.
It's more of a comment than a question. So, I mean, I'm comparatively new to this project, right? I joined in last year where a lot of the grunt work had already been done, but also where a lot of the rubber was starting to hit the road. And working in the health and safety unit of the union like I do, one advantage I have, I guess I can call it, is that I get to look at other projects, right? And not just other projects where COPSOC is administered in a joint way through with the assistance of OCAL, but others. And where I see the main difference being, the most important difference, is that commitment to change afterwards and that joint commitment to change afterwards. Other workplaces don't always get that because unlike Chile, it's not mandatory here. You know, the claim in the mental injury toolkit is that COPSOC is designed to diagnose the workplace, not the worker. And that's very true. What's really important, though, is healing the workplace, not just the worker. And that's what really gives me cause for optimism with this project, is the level of commitment that has been applied to that and actually seeing that rubber hit the road. So that's my 2 cents, because I've seen the places where they just do the survey and leave it at that, and that can even cause more harm than good. Thanks.
Yeah, you're so right, Frank. Other questions and comments? John? John, did you have your hand up or was that a clap?
That was a clap for what Frank said. I wish I wrote it down. Thank you very much.
It's also an example, this project, of how we learn from other people who've taken steps before us. Like, you know, I think it was probably John and OCAL that shared the Quebec report for us in the early days. You know, it's so important, and that's why these sessions are so important, to learn what other places are doing and how they're doing it. Because I think what you guys have done in SolGen is look around and see who's doing what's worked. You know, Denise, you went through a slide of all the challenges that they faced in the Quebec study, which they list there, and you have taken them into consideration as you planned. So I think it's just awesome. I am just so happy that you've come here to talk about your project, and I hope you'll come back in another period of time to tell us about what has gone on since today. Any other comments, questions, thoughts, or especially even from Faraz or Juan, from your perspectives on this project? We've got 2 minutes left.
I was going to ask one question and then maybe can do just.
Okay, sure, Val, go ahead, and that'll give Faraz and Juan a chance to gather
then everybody can do their last. Okay, I'll be the cover. Well, it's amazing journey, and I repeat everyone else's thanks for sharing it with us. And I know that it takes so much persistence and mental energy to try and focus on these kind of, to some extent, intangible things, except they're very tangible in the way they affect people. And so I guess applause, but I also wondered, I guess, if you had two things, I guess, any comment on that you've got a separate committee from the Joint Health and Safety Committee, because we've done the survey ourselves internally, and we've always steered the process through the Provincial Health and Safety Committee. And do you think there's any advantages to striking a separate committee as opposed to, so there's pros and cons, I assume. So I just wanted to ask about the intersection with your Provincial Health and Safety process and the and this one, the OSI. And then I guess, and maybe I missed, do you plan, what's the timing of potentially resurveying? And maybe I missed that, maybe that was already in your timeline. So I just, but thanks very much.
I can answer that. The OSI subcommittee is a subcommittee of the Provincial Health and Safety Committee, and which myself and Denise both sit on, as well as Lisa and Stephen. So we do have the tie-in. Corrections is unique that we do have a standalone subcommittee for occupational stress injuries in our collective agreement, with the acknowledgement it's a true issue out there, and people before me in 2013 recognized this, and we've grown. Other ministries are just starting to catch up with us now. This is something that is true and dear to all of our hearts, and we work at it. But in saying that, we, the Provincial Health and Safety is looped into everything that we do at the OSI committee. And in our report, it did state, in our hope is that in 2023, we will be doing the follow-up survey, and hopefully we will have, I wish we were Chile and we had mandatory participation, but hopefully the results will show some changes in the occupational psychosocial hazards.
Thank you.
Great. For us,
one of the challenges is that you really want to devote the time, effort, and energy to those psychosocial issues and to occupational stress injuries, and tagging that onto our provincial committee just would have been like overwhelming, right? And then it also provided us an opportunity to get other people involved and like have subject matter experts around this really come in and talk about it, because back in 2013, and I would say like even now, there's a lot of learning that has to happen for us on the way. So having sort of that expanded ability to bring people in has been really helpful for us in moving things forward.
Yeah, and it was a conscious effort to make sure that this committee was linked as subcommittee to the Provincial Health and Safety Committee, because we cook in the kitchen, we do health and safety at health and safety, and psychosocial hazards is health and safety. Yeah. I see that we're at 12:02, but I'm just going to let Faraz pop in for a minute and say what you were going to say something, and then I'm going to conclude.
Juan also has a comment.
Oh, great.
I was going to say, I also see Juan's hand. No, just a reflection is, I think it's easy for me to be a very data-driven professional and to sort of come today and say, look, the data is telling us that our emphasis should, fundamentally at some level be more than anywhere else on the sort of workplace in the organization, and not necessarily on sort of resilience and so on, mindfulness as this sort of silver bullet, magic bullet that's going to solve all of our problems that are, I heard somebody, I think it was Adam, talk about, like root causes, but to then also have the pleasure of seeing how folks who are working on these issues from not a different angle, but, from like a different sort of position professionally than myself, it's like really interesting. And I really appreciate the opportunity to see how this really hard work of swimming back upstream and focusing on sort of organizational interventions and things like that, seeing an example play out is very, very, it's a great opportunity for me to learn as well. So thank you for that.
Great. Juan, what do you think from Chile?
Well,
yes.
Really, so I have two comments. One of from the other presentation from Faraz, and this presentation. I think maybe the point is that without participatory method, we are not going to very far. So I think both of the presentations had this in common, that if we deal with psychosocial risk in the workplace, maybe the principal thing to do is to get the participation of all the person that are in the workplace, from managers to workers, everybody, and we are more or less used to this because we have this mandatory law that in the workplace. But in those countries, those places that are not mandatory, I understand that it's very difficult to get this kind of work that you are doing now. So I think it's the way that we have to go. But never forget that that's participatory. The participation of people, of workers, are and supervisors and managers are essential for a program, plan. Go to a good final end. That's what can I say.
Great. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thanks, everyone. I see that it's 12:05, so I'll conclude. I just want to thank to all of our speakers and for sharing your experience and knowledge with our participants today. Juan, Faraz, Michelle, Adam, Denise, Frank, Lisa, and Stephen. What you have accomplished in your work is truly inspiring for others, really. This journey for psychosocial health and safety is not only possible, it's a priority. And to our participants, thank you for joining us. The recording and the resources will be posted on the OCAL website soon, so these presentations will continue to have a life. Please share them with your colleagues who could not join us today, and check out some of our other sessions just like this that you might have missed. There's a treasure trove there. And tune in next week and the week after. We still have 2 Mayday sessions left. On May 20th, session 4 will delve into diverse perspectives on workplace mental health. And on May 27th, we'll share stories and talk solutions. Hope to see you then. For now, go and grab some lunch and enjoy some of the sunshine. And thank you so much for inspiring us all.